All right. This is Cliff from the Doorway, too. Hanging out with Austin from Suicide Forest. Thanks for doing this on a wonderful Easter Sunday.
Thanks for having me.
um, again, really do appreciate you doing this. I guess I'll start off with the simplest question is, uh, I started listening to you with the split with Chrome Waves, so that's where I actually heard you for the first time. Uh, Jeff gave me praises of you and told me to check you out. So that was kind of like that's kind of how it happened. But anyway, I really kind of got caught up in the atmosphere and the it. There's almost melody in what you do, like that I really dig. Where a lot of like depressive black metal doesn't have that melody; it has that sorrow. But I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit as a songwriter, is that melody really important to you? Because I hear it a whole lot in a new record as well.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the riffs that I put together, I try to pay attention a lot to voice leading, which is like basically the idea where it's like if you have two voices, you don't just want them to move like in the same direction all the time. You kind of want them to, if you're having two voices, you have them move around each other, and it creates like I don't know. I studied composition, and so thinking about like old music, the way they used to write like vocal music and stuff like that, I think about guitar playing in a very similar way, especially for this kind of music.
Cool. Yeah, because you could definitely hear it. You can hear that there's an ebb and flow between the vocals, the guitars, and the overall tone of the record, especially with the split as well too. The really cool thing that I liked about it, where there was a real good dichotomy with Chrome Waves and you, is you both have that kind of and if this is something you don't like, sorry, it's what I hear though. You both have this kind of really kind of post rock and gothic overtone in what you do. Yours is more black metal. Theirs is more kind of avant-garde, but still, it's the same vibe. And I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit on, as far as guitar tones and arrangements. Is that super important? Like to make sure that it has that sadness, but yet has that catchiness to it as well?
I mean, I've definitely listened to my share of goth rock and gothic music. Uh,
Gotcha.
I'm not sure if it's a conscious thing that I'm doing or that I'm pulling from. I mean, honestly, one of the interesting things about Suicide Force, I play in a bunch of different types of bands, and I've done
Yeah.
a lot of different types of music. But there's something really it just comes really natural when it comes to writing these kind of riffs. Like to me, it almost seems like when I'm playing something and I put it together, it just seems like, oh, this is how it would obviously go. I don't really have to put too much thought into it. Like I feel like, especially when it comes to the composition and arrangement, most of the work comes after the guitars and drums have been written.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So we usually I'll start with like a guitar riff and I'll get the drums behind it, and then I'll start thinking about how can I make this more interesting when I do something different with the bass or with the synth.
Very cool. Yeah, no, and again, that's what I hear all along. So at least I'm on the same page, and that's a good thing. So I kind of wanted to ask, how did you hook up with Avantgarde Records? Like you were working with Disorder with Chrome Waves. I figured that's where the next release would come, and then all of a sudden I get this record from Avantgarde. Like, how did you hook up with them, and why not work with Disorder again?
Well, so Avantgarde released the first full length album,
Okay,
and so this was the follow up to the full length. The second, this is the second full length, so it's follow up to that. I actually originally the first full length was supposed to be released on another record label, and it was basically done and getting ready to be released, but then a lot of problems happened with that label. But that's a whole other story. And like because so much work and money had gone into making the first record, the people at that last label helped me get the deal with Avantgarde, and they were the ones who actually started the communications to get that first album released. And then when that album that sold out on Avantgarde, we were like, well, let's do another one.
nice, nice. That very cool. Yeah, Andrea is cool, so that's why I
Yeah.
was asking. Always been really helpful, really supportive to me. So I can't say anything good things about that either. But Jeff over at Disorder's been the same way. He pretty much praised you to me, and that's where I heard you the first time. So that was kind of a nice thing as well too. So
Yeah, Jeff's always done like all of our merch, and I'm
nice.
definitely a fan of the stuff that he's been a part of. Even when he was still touring with Abigail Williams, like me and Zach, who plays bass and does live bass in Suicide Forest, we would go and we would like get drunk with him and Ken behind like Club Red or whatever.
Nice. Yeah. Club Red, you just made me sad because I just found out that they closed down forever last month.
I
It's like
know.
one of my favorite places to ever go, being that I live in Phoenix too. Uh, so I kind of wanted to also ask, so being a one-man band and then going on shows and playing live with a live setting, um, what do you try and do differently from the one-man side recording versus like when you hit the stage and perform? Is there different elements that you like to bring out when you have a live, a live setting versus the recording?
I think with the recording, I'm less focused on like the actual recording process itself and trying to think about kind of the big picture, like creating the atmosphere and more of like the composition aspect of it. Like I don't want to say I like don't pay attention to the like production aspect at all. Like that is a big part of it, but I focus more on like what am I creating right now and like what's like almost all of the stuff that I've ever done for like the synth, I like wrote it that day and like
Okay.
let it like inspire, just listen to the riffs a bunch, think about like how where the harmony is moving, to like think about what my hands are doing and how that's going to contrast. And I just kind of let it happen. When we go perform it, it's much more about kind of living and existing in that atmosphere as opposed to trying to build it. And especially when you have it like you're playing it and you're performing it with a group of people, it's a lot more of an experience as opposed to like a creative process.
So, I mean, you'd have to live under a rock to not know what Suicide Forest is, being in this day and age, in this world. Uh, what drew you to that? I mean, I understand that it's in Japan, it's, where people go depressed and allegedly, I'll say, so we don't get in
Mhm.
trouble here,
Right.
murder or commit suicide. And what drew you to that as the setting for the title of the band?
Well, when I first put the project together, it was like I had the idea for the band maybe going back to even like 2014. Uh, and like I just had the idea like I wanted to do something that was like depressive black metal but like heavy on the atmosphere, and it was like early or maybe late 2015 that I actually started writing stuff for it. And I just remember like I was working at a tattoo shop at the time, and when you work as a piercer at a tattoo shop, you end up having a lot of free time. And so just perusing Facebook and just going through like the black metal meme pages and shit like that. I remember just coming across a couple of times like mentions of a forest where people go to commit suicide, and I didn't think like, oh, it's like that they call it the suicide forest, but in my mind I was like, why isn't that a band name? And I looked it up and I couldn't find like any metal bands that were calling themselves Suicide Force. And like that just sounds like the perfect name for a DSBM band. I don't know why anyone hasn't taken that.
Good call. Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
it was one of those things I don't think at the time I realized that like everyone kind of knew the Suicide Forest. And it wasn't until after the first album was released that people started really associating that specific place with, or at least in my mind, I didn't recognize that people were calling that the Suicide Forest.
Uh,
Like I knew it existed, but in my mind, I hadn't really made like oh, I'm inspired specifically by this place. More of like the idea of there's a forest where people go and it compels them to commit suicide.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah, I mean the name fits the music, the vocals, the style for sure. So I can totally see how the two tie together. So I'm going to ask because I have not had the pleasure of listening to your debut, um, but I've heard the split and I've heard this last record. How does the first record differ in any way from the two releases I've heard?
I don't think it's as developed, honestly. I really think the newest record, Reluctantly, ended up being a lot more of what I was going for on the first album. Honestly, the first album came out a bit rushed, in my opinion, as far as the writing and the production. I was still in school at the time. I was still trying to finish my undergrad, and so I was busy with that. Uh, and I was working, and life was like kind of in a chaotic state. And I did 3 Suicide Force demos the year before, and so I had kind of like the initial like inspiration for the project had gone into that, and so I think when I wrote Reluctantly, I had more time in between writing to really kind of rethink about what this project is for me and where I want it to go and what it actually sounds like in my head. And I was able to take more time, especially like I took a lot more time with the lyrics than I usually do. Uh, and I was actually sitting on a lot of riffs for like I had one or two songs written, and then it took me a while to get like the other three written, as opposed to when I did the first album where it was like I wrote almost like 7 songs in like a span of like 3 or 4 weeks, and then just kind of picked from the best ones and arranged them a little bit differently, and then went with those. These ones were a lot more. I let them kind of take longer to develop.
Cool. So I want to talk about a particular song off of Reluctantly that kind of drew me, called to me. And that's going to be track number 4, which is Trembling and Emptiness. And I'm an old school doom death guy, been playing that kind of stuff for a really long time. And there's a really kind of doom element in that song to me, where the other ones have a lot more of a black metal overtone, but there's a really doomy kind of tone in there. And I don't know if you, again, just kind of happened, or whatever, but I wanted to talk a little bit about that song in particular, and kind of how did it come about? How do you feel about that song? Talk to me a little bit about that track.
That song's like kind of interesting. Originally I wrote it not for Suicide Force. It was going to be for a different project. I was in talks with someone, and we were going to do like just like an atmospheric black metal thing, and it was supposed to be 2 guitars, and so it was originally actually written with 2 guitar riffs. And I really liked the direction of the song, and when I was putting stuff together for the new album, I knew I wanted to use that, because the project that in question that it was written for ended up not happening anyways. And but I knew I didn't want a 2 guitar riff. Like, that wasn't what I was going for the feel of this album. And it actually took me a while to figure out what to do instead, because I had been listening to it for so long with the other guitar part, and it took me a long time to figure out what to do with the synth, particularly, like, because I was thinking like, oh, it was kind of melodic, like what I'm doing in the guitars on the final project is like what would be like the rhythm guitar, and then there was like a lead part over it that the other guitar was doing. But I ended up scrapping that old lead guitar part, and I was like, I'll just do the same thing on synth, but it ended up sounding really cheesy and not really what I was going for. And it took me probably 2 or 3 weeks of like really trying to think about and playing with what I was going to do with that synth part to get that to come out the way it was. And kind of the way I always have to do things is simplify it. Don't overthink it. And that's exactly what ended up happening.
Cool. Well, the simplification made it really good. So that's all I'm going to say. So nice work, because that song kind of really, it calls to me. That one's a great track. So it's kind of one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you, because that's the one that it always keeps coming back to me over and over again. And that's the one I keep listening to a lot. So take no offense to what I say right now, because I always have to say this, but I think calling yourself black metal is really fucking limiting. Okay? You are not just strictly like, this is the way I look at it. I've been a musician for 30 years. I put out dozens of records. I've toured. I've done it all too. And I understand you have to label it in a certain way so certain people can understand. But you have so many other things going on in your music than just depressive black metal. Again, like, there's the goth elements, there's some doom elements, there's some death metal elements. To me, there's even some shoegazing elements in it, just from the way the atmosphere is on the way you play. Do you feel that you are just a black metal band, or do you just use that term because it's perfect for bundling it into the label you're with, the majority of people that are going to open the doorway to listen to this band?
Well, I think since I started the project, I wasn't really trying to do anything other than what I think of as just straight up black metal. Like, to me, even like if you listen, like when I listen to especially the first 2 Suicide Forest demos, it sounds like I mean, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm just ripping off Panzerfaust, or I'm just ripping off Philosophum or whatever. But and that is kind of what I went back to, like, after I had written the first album and had released it, and listening to it for a while. I felt it was kind of not where I wanted it to be. And so, like, when I was writing Reluctantly, kind of going back to those black metal roots of just listening to like the lo-fi Darkthrone and Burzum, and literally those 2 bands were like the biggest influence probably for this project. And so it's hard for me to really think about where else it goes, because like that's the primary influence. And I don't really, I mean, there's probably just naturally I'll bring in other elements because I've done other kinds of music. I've been in a funeral doom band. I've been in death metal bands. So just kind of like my own musical musings get weaved into everything. But in my mind, I'm just kind of doing what the people in Norway were doing in the 90s.
Gotcha. Hey, that's cool. No, it totally makes sense. So that's kind of going to table me off to what I kind of want to talk about. So yeah, it looks like you have many different projects that you work with that go from doom to death metal to prog and almost psych rock from what it looks like at times. Uh, is there anything that's out of the question for Suicide Forest? Like, is there something that you start writing and you think it's going to be a Suicide Forest riff, and you're like, oh fuck no, pull that back. That's not going to happen.
I want to say yes, but as I keep going, I find ways of making those things sound more like Suicide Forest. Like there was there's been a couple times where just thinking like single note tremolo riffs.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about, where it's just like a single note playing, like it's a melody going on instead of like chords. I thought that's not really appropriate for this kind of music. It just doesn't fit the atmosphere sound. But then I found a perfect way to incorporate it on As the Light Fades Part 1. You know, and I did it the same thing like on one of the tracks on the last album. And so I can't really say I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think if it was like, there's probably like a few grooves that are like our black metal bands would be using that wouldn't work well for this, like drum grooves. But then, I don't know, I thought the same thing about, the drum groove that was on Light Fades Part 1. So, who knows? I'll say that, I'm putting particular limitations because I want a certain kind of sound, but at the same time, taking things that I already know and forcing them to fit those limitations is how you kind of create new things.
Absolutely. So I love that there's a limited vinyl release. Like that's just something that really makes me smile, man. Like when bands actually get an opportunity to put out a full size artwork and people can actually look at it and immerse themselves with it. I'm not one of those guys that likes to listen to one song and disappear. Again, I told you, I'm an old dude. I'm 48. So like, I come from the world of like, you put a record on, you listen to it, you move on to the next record. Like, and it's very enveloping. Like the artwork and everything that I see seems very conscious. So was there always a theme behind Reluctantly? Or or is it something that's just a collection of songs that you felt fit really well together?
I mean, I don't know. It kind of organically became something that feels a lot more structured than I really intended it to be. I think, the last song I wrote was the instrumental track, mm-hmm. but I knew even before it was written, I was like, I know exactly what needs to go in between these two songs, these songs, and what order they're going to be in. Just because there seemed to be a natural flow after having just 4. And even like I had the 4 written and I thought I needed more. I thought I needed more material. But then as I worked on them a little bit more, I realized that just those 4 tracks and then the instrumental track was really all I needed to kind of make a perfectly coherent release. And it was pretty organic. I don't, honestly, all the lyrics came last. Okay. Actually, the only song I had lyrics written for was the title track. Before I had those written, I think before I had other songs written. But it wasn't until the album was almost done that I finished the rest of the lyrics.
Cool. So here's a question that's going to make you think a bit. I do this with everybody, so it's your turn now to be able to try and answer this too. So let's say it's the old days and you're in a record store and somebody just happens to pick up your record and they look at you and they say, hey, have you ever heard this? Is this any good? Could you explain to me what it sounds like? How would you explain your own band to someone that's going to listen to it for the very first time just because they picked it up, looked at the album cover and said, fuck, this looks cool?
I don't know. I'd probably have to ask them what they usually listen to kind of give them a gauge. You know what I mean? I don't know. What is this like? It's atmospheric black metal. I don't know.
Hey, if you need to be generic and paint by the numbers on it, that's completely cool. No, like that's what I say. Like, so let's think a little bit deeper. Let's say the kid's never really listened to black metal before, and he literally just picked up the album cover because he's a metal kid, but he's starting to experiment into different sounds. How would you explain that to someone like that?
maybe like use terms like minimalist or like uh, simplified or just ambient.
Cool.
Uh, you know, talk about atmosphere and like maybe try to compare like if they know of certain bands, be like maybe the atmosphere of this band with like the feel or the more of a sound of this band, like using like it has like the feeling of like a gothic album like Floods from Sisters of Mercy
Yeah.
with like the guitars and drums of like I don't know if they don't listen to black metal. I guess you could say like the early like Hell Awaits or something or like Show No Mercy, right?
Absolutely. No, that works great. No, and that's what I was going to say is you do have a lot of thrash and goth elements in it. And that's kind of cool that you just kind of brought it to that light that way when people, when people haven't really listened to black metal before. I think this band in general is something that you don't have to love black metal to listen to and enjoy. And that's a really big compliment. So, like, in my personal opinion, like, that you use the Sisters of Mercy reference is fucking phenomenal to me because I work with a friend. We're both supervisors at the company we work at, and we're the only two metalheads that are really there. So we talk about this kind of music and stuff all the time. And I played him your record, and I said, "Imagine if Sisters of Mercy was a fucking depressive black metal band." And he's like, "Really?" And because he likes both those styles, like I do too. And he's like, "I gotta fucking listen to this." And he did. And he goes, "Holy shit!" He's like, "It is a depressive black metal band with a gothic overtone." So, do you see a lot of fans coming from that side? Do you see fans kind of happening where they're, coming from more of like a gothic or more of a kind of a atmospheric side rather than just black metal?
It seems like that's kind of become a pretty common thing, at least these days. I don't know, like definitely here on the West Coast, it seems like there's almost like a gothic renaissance. Like I see a lot more Bauhaus shirts than I did like, 10 years ago. Uh, I think maybe it's also just kind of like people who like this kind of music realize that there was a lot of stuff that they missed out on.
Yeah.
And so they're going back and like listening to things that, were really obscure in like the 80s or 90s, and there's like a bit of a revival for some of that stuff too, it seems like. And then like even like take a look at what's happening in pop music. I mean, that's all like, and that's all nostalgic driven, and so I think within all culture, like we kind of are having this realization that we liked things the way they were before, and so at least artistically, and so people are going back and discovering old music again, which I think is great. The stuff I've been listening to a lot lately is stuff that was released 30 years ago.
Trust me, I get it. I'm the old man yelling at the clouds about, about that stuff too, man. I go back and I have these moments where I have my 80s and 90s like days where there's nothing I listen to, and then there'll be a whole bunch of new stuff I listen to. But cool, no, that's very awesome. Um, so if I was to tell you that I hear elements of bands like Bethlehem and Dionysus in your music too, would you say that there are influences at all? Or
I couldn't say that because I haven't listened to enough of those bands.
okay,
Yeah.
perfect. No, and the reason why I ask is because you're the closest thing that I've heard to Dionysus, like on the like Arc of Thought record in a really long time. Like you mix all those elements that I love. You mix the elements of doom, atmospheric black metal, and kind of gothic elements all into something that's like not a lot of bands are doing right now. And I'm not like blowing smoke. I'm not praising for no reason whatsoever. It's just those are the elements that I like in black metal, and that's why I like this kind of style because it's not just a static blast beat at 90 miles an hour. And you know what? I could put one of 7 records on, and it's really not going to make a fucking difference. Mm-hmm. Not that they're not good, but it's like I mean, let's be honest. There's some black metal bands out there that you and I listen to that we love that are our babies that we did. But if I put one of 7 records on, you wouldn't know which one of those 7 records it was. Like right. That's not you. So I kind of want to ask you in that respect. Are you wanting to take it to different places? Because from even the EP, like the split to this full length, reluctantly, I hear a lot more layers. Is that something that you want to do in the future and kind of add more elements, or are you pulling it back for future stuff?
I think I really like where things got with Reluctantly, and so probably the I mean, I was actually thinking about like what's going to happen next, because originally I was thinking I was going to do like an EP after this album came out, but now I'm just of the mind that I'm probably going to do another full length, and it's probably going to be pretty similar to the direction that Reluctantly went, trying to at least capture like what I had originally in mind with the first Suicide Force demos, and developing it maybe a little bit more. Like those, especially the very first one, it was so minimal and so basic, but the atmosphere was there, and so I kind of want to have that simple minimalist aspect while still finding ways to keep it new and interesting. And
cool.
I think, yeah.
No, awesome. No, continue on. If you want to say something else, that's more.
I'm just rambling at this point.
Dude, that's what an interview is. Two guys rambling about music they love. That's all it is. So I guess the next thing I'm going to ask, and I really kind of want feedback on this, because being a one-man band, you're going to be able to have an insight on it that a lot of people don't. So it's so easy today for anybody to get a 4-track, an 8-track, get a DAW, and be able to go in and record music. But there's a lot of good one-man music. And the problem is I think there's a stigma still, which is sad in this day and age, where if you're not a full band, people don't look at it the same way as a full band. And I want to kind of get your thoughts on it. Do you think there needs to be more of this exposed to people, or is there just too much exposed, and that's why people are saying like, oh, it's another one of those one-man black metal bands? Because that's the thing I've most commonly seen about reviews for you, is they jump on the one-man black metal bandwagon before they actually review the fucking record. And it drives me crazy. So talk to me a little bit about that.
I mean, I think there definitely is an oversaturation of one-man black metal bands. Like Suicide Force wasn't even my first one-man project. So like, I don't necessarily blame them in thinking that. And every time I feel like I discover a new like unknown one-man project on Bandcamp or whatever, like I'm listening to it and it's like sampled drums, or it's like you can tell it's like not real bass, or it's something where it's like you can tell the guy just plays guitar and did the vocals and then just kind of did like demo quality stuff and called it a band. And I was always very like, if I'm going to be doing like a one-man band, it better be real fucking drums.
Gotcha. That's cool. Yeah, too many one-man bands out there using easy drums and a whole bunch of bass synth patches.
Yeah, and like that's cool if you're writing stuff, but don't make me buy your album don't make me buy a release that you just made, with MIDI programming. Like you didn't hire a real drummer to like put some parts to it. If you can't do your own parts, you can hire a drummer. There's plenty of drummers out there who would do it for you.
Prime example right here, my friend. My musical partner is the drummer in my project because I cannot play drums. And I'm totally with you. We're a two-piece just for that purpose, because I can't fucking play the drums, man. It's totally cool. If there were two bands that you would say that influenced you the most for Suicide Force, who are they and why?
Two bands that influenced the most. It's hard to say, because the influence have really changed over the time. Like when I first had the idea of like depressive black metal, the only depressive black metal I really listened to was like Thy Light, Disaster probably. And then in like 2016, right after the first demo came out, I got really, really into Shining, and I got really, really into bands like Make a Change, Kill Yourself, or Leviathan. I got really heavy into Leviathan after that. Now that like I listened to Leviathan before that, but I like kind of rediscovered Leviathan in like 2016. And those were probably the earlier influences for sure. But then like kind of, especially when I was thinking about like writing Reluctantly, just kind of going back and listening to just the pure black metal roots that I had mentioned before, like, the Burzum and Darkthrone records that I was really into, and just thinking about their approach to particularly like drumming and riff writing.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, well, you can hear the Burzum vibes in it, so I totally understand. The atmospheres are there. Make a Change, Kill Yourself is very cool. You can definitely hear that as well too. I'm definitely gonna have to check out the older stuff just because I want to hear it now because you're telling me it's more simplified and a little bit more raw and chaotic. So like,
The first demo didn't even have bass on it. Like originally, like the idea for Suicide Force was like I'm gonna make it so minimal, and I was also like in a really shitty place, so I was like I just don't give a fuck. I'm just gonna make just whatever this ends up sounding like is what it's gonna fucking end up sounding like. And
nice.
so I just did like one or two takes for the drums with a really simple drum setup, and like the guitars just straight off of the amp, keys straight into the the interface, and then the vocals. I didn't even record bass for the first demo. And then I performed it live with like just a couple friends, like, and I was like, oh, okay, that was the first and only live time I'll ever do this. That
Nice.
ended up changing because after that there was a bit more of a demand for like a black metal band to play some shows around town, and I had a friend who wanted to do bass, and so I started adding bass to the mixes, and so I mean I probably should have just added bass the first time, but it just didn't end up happening.
Hey, it's that point in time, right? And then
Yeah.
everything changes from there. So being from Tucson, is there a scene there right now for this kind of stuff? Because even in Phoenix, it's kind of really minimal right now.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes and goes. Like it comes in waves. People get really interested in hardcore, then people get really interested in death metal, and then you'll have like a small pocket of people who are interested in black metal. It seemed to like it was building because for a while there was a couple bands that was doing like regular black metal shows here, and we would also like bring bands from like Texas or California or even from Phoenix. And so there is a little bit of like a black metal scene here, I would say, but it's very tight, and it is small, but it's not hard to put on a good black metal show here.
Cool. Yeah, it's not hard for it to hear either, but there's less and less bands doing it now, which is kind of. I mean, I know nobody's playing live right now, back a year ago, even there was not that many black metal bands that were local. There was a lot more kind of deathcore and technical death metal stuff that's kind of happening here right now. So
There was definitely a lot of that. I feel like maybe over the past like 4 or 5 years, there's been like maybe 3 or 4 bands that have become like pretty active in doing stuff, and so like it's easy to kind of every couple of months get together, and it's just like local black metal or like black and death metal or something similar.
cool. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about your other projects because I kind of wanted to do that as well because I find it really interesting that you play so many varying styles. Does it ever become difficult to kind of separate the different projects together? Do they start maybe blending together sometimes when you start writing riffs? Like you're not sure if it's going to go to project X, Y, or Z?
I don't know. It's usually it's more about like I'll have like a period of time where I'm just focused on one project, and then I'll like not even worry about that for months and not even think about it. Like that's kind of what happened with Suicide Forest, like at least recently, because I just did the album, and so it's like, all right, now I don't even need to think about that. I'm going to focus on like this EP that I've been thinking about or conceptualizing for a long time, and that sounds completely different because it's a completely different mindset. And then it also like there's some other projects where it's a little bit more collaborative, and so there's a little bit less of a focus on me to like prepare all the material, and it's
Mhm.
more about like other people bring material, and I'm just kind of I'm part of like the development or part of the arrangement or part of taking that riff and then doing something with it to make a song longer or whatever. So I think it's more of like kind of, I guess, in the same way that the music scene here changes, it changes in waves. My the riffs that I want to write, they'll change in waves as well.
Gotcha. Awesome. So are you working on one of the other projects right now for a release, or are you focusing just on Suicide Forest at the moment?
Actually, at the moment, I'm renovating my studio. So
Gotcha.
yeah, right now, like all my music projects, or at least writing stuff, is like I'm taking a minute because I released like fucking 5 releases in 2020.
Wow.
Like it was a lot, and so I'm like, all right, cool. I'm gonna fix my studio now, and then when that's done, I don't even know what project is next in line, but something will start happening. Probably the psychedelic rock band will start writing material because we want to release a full length soon.
Cool. That's awesome to know. Uh, so I'm gonna ask you a kind of a left of center question because I always love to kind of get feedback for this too. Have you gotten any reviews recently that kind of shocked you, uh, and maybe kind of said something that I don't care if it's positive, negative, because you know what? There's no such thing as bad press. Like it's just inspires and gets people to listen to it. I'll be honest with you. My band Until the Sky Dies got a 0 out of 10 out of from Angry Metal Guy, and it was probably the greatest moment in my goddamn life because more people bought the record because they said he was a fucking moron because it was a 0 out of 10 than getting a 10 out of 10 review in most places. So like I kind of have you gotten a review where you were like, holy shit, they don't get it at all, or holy shit, they've listened to it in a way that I did never really thought somebody would hear it before.
I think for Suicide Forest, it was probably the positive reviews that I
Okay.
was like, surprised about. Uh, Especially like in the beginning, like I had no intention for it to do anything. Like I put barely any effort into the first demo, and then like the second demo I released on Bandcamp, and a guy in Italy wanted to release it on CD,
Okay.
and it got released on CD just because he liked it, and I'm like, if you fucking say so, dude. Like it's kind of weird. I get with Suicide Forest is like the most successful I've had with any of my projects so far, but it's probably like the least invested I am in like caring what other people think about it.
Sure.
You know, there have been other projects where like I really enjoyed the material and I really liked what we did. Maybe I didn't like, something about the release or whatever, like production wise or something, but I still liked the material. And then someone like wrote a review and like shit all over it. And I'm like, that fucking sucks.
Yeah, I get it. Trust me. You read them and then you get mad and then you realize, you know what? Not everybody's gonna like everything. So that's just the
Yeah.
way of the world.
Well, and then it's like with Suicide Forest, I feel like the only actual like bad reviews that I've ever gotten have been from people who don't even like the genre to begin with.
Yeah.
Like, they make it obvious that they don't even like the genre to begin with. So what the fuck do I care what you think?
Yeah. No, and that makes complete sense. And this is also such a small genre that, if people are going to like it, they're going to like it. And it's really hard to win over fans on this kind of music. It's like, it's either something that you grow into or hear instantly or like. It's not like, if I play somebody that doesn't like depressive, black metal, and then I play them another record 2 years later, I get the same input or the same influence. Like they're like, yeah, I just don't get it, man. I just don't get it. Okay, that's fine. But I think that's special for this kind of music, though. I really feel like you either like it, understand it, can feel the vibe you're trying to get with it, or it's just not for you. And if that changes, I think we lose a kind of a special vibe for it. So I don't know if you feel the same way or not. So
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's I don't really make this kind of music expecting people to like it.
yeah,
uh, I mean, I've always played like extreme music, and I've never like the people around me, at least like family wise, like they never were into it. My family doesn't even like music, let alone like metal. You know, so I wasn't really I never really thought about like, oh man, I really hope that people like this or people think about this in like a good way. I'm just like, I just want to make this. You know, I just wanted to make it, and especially because like with Suicide Forest, I had the capability to. Like I was playing in a funeral doom band at the time, and so I wasn't really thinking about like doing another band or another project. But I knew I had these riffs for like these depressive black metal songs, and I had a cool name that I liked, and so I was like, I'll just record this and put it on Bandcamp.
cool. Have you ever thought about using other musicians on a record, or is it always going to stay a one man thing?
It's definitely been thought about, like especially like talking to the people I perform live with. Obviously, they'd like to be more involved. It's hard for me to really think of that as being Suicide Forest anymore.
Okay.
Because it's the whole creative process. The way I do things is very like it's very sporadic, and it's very like it's only going to work if I'm doing it that way. At least I feel like the only way I can get it to come out the way that it came out is because of my really chaotic creative process that wouldn't really work with other people.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. So I guess this is going to be an interesting last question then, because of the statement you just made. I asked this question last to everybody, and I always just love to get a vibe. So let's say uh, Reluctantly's done. It hasn't been released yet, and you can hand it to anyone, any artist. I don't care who it is. I don't care what style. I don't care if they're living, dead, whatever, and they can rework it and make it in their own image. Who would you want to try and do that, and why?
Typo Negative.
Why?
I feel like that's like the only band that isn't like a black metal band who could probably capture the same kind of feel, like that same kind of like that they'd turn it into more of like a droney kind of gothic thing. But I think that's like probably a good direction it could go in, you know?
That's funny. I mean, I could definitely hear. So I'm just going to give you a little sidebar. So Typo Negative has haunted my life for like, well, I grew up in New Jersey, lived in the New York area, knew Pete Steele and those guys for years, and like literally, uh, Typo Negative comes up in more conversations than ever to me, and I never bring it up. Like it's just one of these strange things. Like I swear to God that Typo Negative, like you said, is the most black metal, unblack metal band there is.
It's completely true. Everyone I know who likes black metal fucking loves Typo Negative.
Right.
You can't separate them.
No, you can't. And it's because of those gothic overtones and those dark atmospheres. Just like we talked about in the beginning. They tie together in this music to like this weird brotherhood and sisterhood that you can never separate. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper in this because I like what you said. And what period Typo Negative?
Oh man. Oh.
And the reason why I do that is because you know what I'm saying. There are four distinct different periods of Typo Negative.
Yeah, it would have. I mean, probably Bloody Kisses.
Okay.
Bloody Kisses era, just because that's like when I think like 90s goth meets metal. That's almost kind of what comes to mind. And so like and that to me is like what I think of as Typo Negative. You know, like
awesome.
So yeah.
Now all you got is I know someone. Like you got these songs on my head. I know someone else is fucking like these things are in my head now. Yeah, no, but Bloody Kisses is definitely the period I was thinking that would be the best fit because to me it's when he still had that kind of carnivore mentality.
Yeah.
And it was still kind of aggressive, but he was moving into that goth kind of style, and it's the best of both worlds. The other band I was going to really say that like kind of does that, and I don't know if you like them at all, is Life of Agony. So like I think Typo Negative or Life of Agony could do really interesting things for your music. So like I said, if you've never heard A River Runs Red through from Life of Agony, check it out because I really think that you will dig that record. Yeah, but other than that, I am going to leave the door open for you right now to kind of talk about your projects, your music, whatever you want. It's kind of your pulpit right now for the next couple of minutes. Talk about whatever you wish.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess 2020 was a pretty productive year. Like I started with recording the Suicide Forest album, and then I released 2 EPs from my psychedelic rock project, Temple, TMPL. I also did 2 like demo EPs for this project that was inspired. Like, I don't know if you remember when the fires were happening here in Tucson, but it was like the same week that the George Floyd riots were happening. And so like literally like it was lockdown happened and then George Floyd protests while all of the mountains surrounding Tucson were on fire. And so it's just kind of like there was a period of like 2 weeks where it literally just felt like the world, like this is Armageddon, like the world is ending. And so just in that time, I ended up writing like 2 demo EPs that are very like Bathory meets Vaughn blasphemy-esque. And then like I had a friend do the vocals on it, but I did all the other instruments. And then we released that, and that was a lot of fun. That band's called Prototorium. We released both of those on Bandcamp for free. I have a Dungeon Synth project that I released a full length for. I did an ambient release with the live bass player for Suicide Forest. We have an ambient project we do together. So yeah, a lot of I do a lot of music, and I'm kind of always staying busy with that kind of stuff.
Cool. Um, what can we look forward to for Suicide Forest? Is there anything besides the album coming out in the near future, or?
Well, I mean, hopefully we can start touring again as soon as that can happen. Like ideally, like my goal was as soon as I graduated, which was May of 2020, I was hoping to just start touring right away. But March came around and canceled that idea. So I'm just kind of still waiting for that to happen, and that's probably going to be the next thing is getting back to performing and doing some touring, and then working on another full length.
Awesome. You're going to work with Avantgarde, continue on with them, or?
Probably. We haven't discussed it yet, but I don't see why I wouldn't, unless I get offered like a really good deal from another label. But whatever.
Cool. Awesome. Well, Austin, again, thank you so very much for doing this with me on this Sunday night. Clint from the Doorway 2, hanging out with Austin from Suicide Forest. And again, you have a great night, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.